And from the physical point of view, I went through, and I still do, a very severe physical training course.
What was the conception of the part, though, that made it perhaps different from the conventional Othellos that we're used to seeing?
Well, you know, there's a very rough estimate of the theme of Shakespearean tragedy. You know, it's so easy to say, and it's constantly said, and it's roughly good enough, that Shakespearean tragedy is founded by Shakespeare upon the theme of a perfect statue of a man, perfect statue. And he shows one fissure in the statue and how that fissure makes the statue crumble down and disappear into utter disorder. Well, from that idea, you roughly get that Othello is perfect, except that he's too easily jealous. But there seems to me, and that has grown in me, a conviction over the last few years, that in most of the characters, not all, but in most of them, that weakness is accompanied by the weakness of self-deception as a companion fault to whatever fault may be specified by the character in the play. And it's very easy to find in Othello. And once you've found it in Othello, I think you have to go along with it. If you believe, as I do, as I try to show, and I think I do, that when he says, not easily jealous, it's the most appalling bit of self-deception. He's the most easily jealous man that anybody's ever written about. The minute he suspects or thinks he has the smallest grounds for suspecting Desdemona, he wishes to think her guilty. He wishes to. And the very first thing he does, almost on top of that, is to give way to the passion, the temptation of, I suppose, the worst passion in the world, which is murder. He immediately wants to murder, immediately. Therefore, he's an extremely hot-blooded individual. He's an extremely savage creature who has kidded himself and managed to kid everybody else all this time that he's nothing of the kind. And if you've got that, I think that you've got rid of the basis of that character.
Your excursions into contemporary plays, things like The Sleeping Prince by Mr. Rattigan, John Osborne's The Entertainer.
I adore The Entertainer. I think it's the most wonderful part that I've ever played.
Archie Rice was influenced by a Negro blues singer. Are there any actors who've influenced you to that degree?
Yes, lots of them. I've mentioned Fairbanks, Barrymore, whose Hamlet I first saw when I was 17 years old. Noel Coward, in this way, influenced me a great deal. He lent me a very stern professionalism. Of all people I've ever watched with the greatest delight, I think, was in another field entirely, was Sid Field. I wouldn't like anybody to think that I was imitating Sid Field when I was doing The Entertainer.
Well, there were little things in it.
Little things, but Sid Field was a great comic, and this man is a lousy one. But I know when I imitate Sid Field now, to this day, I still borrow from him, freely and unashamedly. I watch all my colleagues very carefully, admire them all for different qualities which they have. And I think the most interesting thing to see is that an actor is most successful when not only all his virtues, but all his disadvantages come into useful play in a part.
You developed into the kind of actor you were when there were no real permanent ensembles, subsidized ensembles in this country. Do you think you'd have developed in the same way if you'd joined a company like the one you have now at the Old Vic when you were beginning?
Well, in a way, from time to time, that has been so with me. From my earlier, the Birmingham Rep, I was there for 2 years, or 2 seasons. I was at the Old Vic for 2 years. I was with Ralph. We engaged with work for the new Old Vic at the New Theatre for 5 years. We tasted the blessings of a permanent troupe. We saw, one can see, when a foreign company who is used to the idea of a permanent ensemble, such as the Moscow Arts Theatre, when they arrive upon our shores and we see their work, it is that hot breath of unity that whenever I've seen it all through my life, sometimes quite rarely, but whenever I have, has always seemed to me to be more important than the star system. It is more important to an audience, ultimately, than the star system, though goodness knows how many years it's going to take us to make that clear to them. But it must be made clear to them.
When you were first asked to be director of the National Theatre, was this the first thought in your mind, to create that kind of sort of company?
Yes. Oh, yes, because I had, in smaller ways than this, I had formed companies before, and next to directing a film, which I'm sorry to have to say is the most exciting thing I've ever done, but next to that, forming a company, helping it along, serving it, leading it, if you like, not necessarily so. That's the most exciting thing I think a man can do.
At the Old Vic, of course, you're an administrator and an actor, and you direct plays. Do you find being an administrator interferes with the active theatrical work?
I think I act and direct all I need to, all I want to. I love the job. I was very frightened of it when I started it, but I looked around as honestly as I could, and I hope without self-deception. And I thought that probably was perhaps the fellow with the best sort of experiences to start the thing going. And I was determined that there should be a national theatre in our country. I think the theatre is probably the only way of making the theatre a part of people's lives. It'll take a bit of time.
Is there a special sort of actor you were looking for when you formed the National Theatre Company?
Very good ones. Very good ones. Versatile ones. People had their heart in the right place about it. Unlazy ones. Deeply enthusiastic. Courageous. Gifted with all sorts of attributes. I must say that the nature of the work, as I've said before, does demand physical, not perfection, but physical prowess. When you get an actor who is gifted with immense strength, his coordination is so much better than a weedy type of an actor.
Our situation here now is that we've got plenty of openings for actors in this country. Our subsidized theatres opened up so much. But if you could look ahead, say 5 or 10 years hence, how different or what changes would you look for in our own company at the Vic?
I'd like better conditions, first of all.
Such as?
Sounds a better theatre, better conditions, in order to increase activities, so that eventually, perhaps, the art of the actor may finally be regarded as an important part of the life of the people.